from the U.S. Bank Stadium press box, the Locked On Vikings postcast. Welcome in. Thanks for joining us. I'm running solo today. Luke Braun is a scratch due to illness. It's going around. That's fine. A lot of people are sick this time of year, and Luke had to call it for this one. That's all right. We're going to power through. You can follow me on Twitter, by the way, at Sam Ekstrom, and follow along with the reaction to this game, a 27-22 Vikings win. This Locked On Vikings postcast brought to you by BetOnline, betonline.net. Vikings covered in this one, by the way, and the line went over. A 27-22 win that tortured every fan in attendance. The Minnesota Vikings nearly blow a 17-point lead, and this is classic Vikings this year. Nothing can be comfortable. The Vikings impressively moved down the field a couple times in the first half. They go up 20-3 just in front of halftime. And then the second half, it was defense optional, offense optional. I will credit them with this. Red zone defense was tight in this game. They were 5 for 6 against the Jets in the red zone. Jets do not score 2 attempts in the red zone in the final 2 minutes, including a second and goal from the 1. And they nearly failed on the 4th and goal from the 1 on the previous drive. We can get into that. There's a lot of elements to discuss in this game. This was the Vikings hanging on for dear life. They emptied the clip, it felt like, early in this game, and they weren't able to muster much offense in the second half at all. Kirk Cousins, wobbly. And I mean that figuratively. I mean that maybe physically, too, after he took a couple big hits in the first half. And it felt like in the second half they were trying to protect him more. And in doing so, it stagnated the offense. They lost a lot of aggressiveness. Justin Jefferson didn't get targeted very much. And, hey, this is a good Jets defense. It's a pretty good Jets secondary. And I know they were banged up a little bit, but Sauce Gardner was as advertised. He, for the most part, shut down his side of the field. Justin Jefferson held to 45 yards, but a critical fourth quarter touchdown. And I think when Jefferson made that catch, put the Vikings up by 12, I think fans, the defense, offense, I don't think they expected to need to claw the way they did in the closing seconds to win this game. But tackling abandoned the Vikings in this fourth quarter. The Corey Davis play to get deep downfield inside the 10. Horrible tackling job by Chandon Sullivan. Horrible tackling on Zonovan Knight a handful of times late in this game. They almost had Mike White wrapped up behind the goal line on that 4th and goal sneak, and eventually he worked his way in after review. But for whatever reason, this Vikings team bends and bends and bends to the point where you just expect them to implode, and then they bow up near the goal line. Again, the yardage against them is gaudy in this game. Mike White, in his 5th career start, 6th career game, I think it is, 57 passes, 369, 2 picks, no touchdowns. Moved the ball inside the 20s, could not get it home in the end zone. And he did seem a little uncomfortable on some of those tighter window throws and got no help from his wide receivers all day. There were 26 incompletions in this game for Mike White. How many times did his pass catcher get their hands on the football? Tyler Conklin a couple times. Braxton Berrios in the end zone. Garrett Wilson a couple times. Corey Davis. The wide receivers, while they did make some nice plays in this game, did Mike White absolutely no favors. And the Berrios drop in the end zone, that play's got to be made. 4th and goal at the 1. Game on the line, and Berrios can't hang on. Vikings dodge a major bullet. Interesting, though, Mike White has now thrown multiple interceptions in 4 of the 5 games where he played most of the game. There was one game where he got hurt in the first quarter. So while I think that there's a lot to like about Mike White, I think that the decision-making still leaves something to be desired. He is extremely decisive, though. He knew exactly where he wanted to go with the football, and he threw it there fearlessly. Not always accurately, but he was confident even in his mistakes, I guess you might say. And I think there's a lot to like about. I think that could be a guy in this league. And this is a quality win for the Minnesota Vikings. I'm not saying it's a quality quarterback or even a quality offense, but it's a quality team, a team that seems to reflect the attitude of its head coach. They fight really, really hard. The defense is really, really tough, and they completely held the Vikings down in the second half. Again, Minnesota puts together one big drive. one big drive. And it was a great drive. 7 plays, 75 yards. Kirk Cousins makes that throw to Justin Jefferson, gives the Vikings just enough cushion for a 27-22 win. This episode brought to you by betonline.net. Vikings covered in this game. They were favored by 3.5. They win by 5. And by the way, in Locked On Sports Minnesota, we've got our Minnesota Football Party betting contest. I took the Washington football team and the Giants under 40.5. They tied 20-20. So I'm reveling in that cover right now in our little picks contest. And we get all our lines from betonline.net. Check it out. That's where the game starts. What else to discuss in this game? I think Kirk Cousins could be a little banged up. And he did a nice job of not showing it for the most part. But you could tell that as he went to the sideline after that hit he took in the first half, he was hurting. He was hurting. And I think the Vikings legitimately altered what they were doing in the second half because of it. Caleb Evans concussed for a second time. That's not good. He becomes the second Viking in recent weeks to suffer a concussion immediately after returning from a concussion. And you saw the way the Vikings have handled Christian Darrisaw with his second concussion. He's he's already missed 2 weeks. Will he miss 3? We'll see. But I don't know if we can expect a Caleb Evans to jump right back in. Now, fortunately, the Vikings could get Cam Dantzler back. Kirk Cousins, he's an Iron Man. He took some serious hits in this game, including on the deep ball to Jalen Reagor, which seemed to kind of take the wind out of him. And then he took another one later in that drive on the third down to Thielen that seemed to really maim him a little bit. So that's something to watch for on the injury report. Is it the ribs? Is it, the arm, the shoulder, bruise, whatever? Kirk Cousins does a good job of not letting on exactly where he's hurting. But I got to imagine he'll need some ice packs after this game. The Jets beat the Vikings up. They're a physical team. And, they're 7-5. That's probably a playoff team. And they showed the graphic. Jets are the only team with a better fourth quarter point differential than the Vikings. And that's with a pretty terrible offense. And they've had Zach Wilson as their quarterback for a lot of the year. So the Jets are tough. Imagine if they get a quarterback they can trust week to week. And I would say give the keys to Mike White. Let him sling it for the rest of the year and see what happens. It feels like your ceiling is a little higher. And he made some tight window throws, especially that one that he threaded in toward the end of the game for the big gainer over the middle. Vikings special teams in this one kind of gets back on track. Greg Joseph does not miss a kick. And again, they give up a 60-yarder before halftime. By the way, that's an NFL record. They've now given up 3 60-plus yard field goals in the season. NFL record. Kickers against the Vikings. They're all Pro Bowlers. Vikings do get Dalvin Tomlinson back from his injury, and I thought that made an impact. I thought their front was really hard to penetrate. The Jets got a little bit going outside, but I felt like Tomlinson held his own. The Jets only rush and they do, now that I'm seeing the box score, 120 yards, 5 yards a pop, I feel like that bolstered as the game went on. I felt like the Vikings were shutting down that run early, and then the tackling got sloppy late. So in the end, bottom line for the Jets, not bad running the ball, even though I felt like the Vikings really did a nice job. And I guess, now that I see it, the Zonovan Knight 48-yard run kind of throws off those averages. Take that out of the equation. And I know it counts, but then it was 72 yards on 23 carries, which is like 4 yards a carry, which is a lot better looking. I thought of Caleb Evans before his injury. I thought he looked good. And other than that, the Vikings generally come out of this game healthy, except for Evans. And we don't know about Kirk Cousins yet. But Cousins was uneven in this game. Inaccurate, throwing high over receivers. I feel like that's been a trend this year. And maybe a little bit skittish, not wanting to, take another hit, short-arming some throws, not stepping into them the way he should. The mini bye week was supposed to do the Vikings some good, and I think it did. But then when you come out and get pounded the way they did today by the Jets' physical team, that could leave a mark going into Detroit. A Detroit team, by the way, that won 40-14 today. And the Vikings will need to win that game if they want to clinch the NFC North because they play the Lions. And the Lions, it's a Vikings win or a Lions loss, and Minnesota could clinch next week. They do not get help from Philadelphia. Philadelphia is good, folks. They take care of business against a tough Titans team at home. And now they go on the road for 3. So the Vikings have Lions, Colts, Giants the next 3. Eagles have 3 on the road. Can the Eagles drop a couple on the road? Give the Vikings a chance to get back into this thing? I still think the Eagles are definite favorites to be that 1 seed. But beyond anything that's happening in the NFC North, the Vikings are going to win this division. You're worried about Philadelphia because that is such a prize to be pursued. And the Vikings still a de facto 2 games back in that race by virtue of not having the tiebreaker. But the win is important today. The win is important because it builds your margin for error even greater. At this point in the season, it almost doesn't matter that you might be a little bit fraudulent, that your point differential is basically even, that your quarterback is not putting up numbers and your defense gives up a ton of yards. At this point, you're a double-digit win team. You're over Vegas's over-under. You've already exceeded expectations to such a point that, all these wins count. And now you are trying to create a favorable matchup for yourself in the postseason. So if that means you get to play the 7 seed in the first round, that is going to make your path just a little bit easier in the playoffs. Can you get a second home playoff game? That's going to make your path a little easier in the playoffs. And once you get there, you never know what's going to happen. So the Vikings, again, if they are going to turn back into a pumpkin at some point, well, hey, they've already got 10 wins to their name, and it's hard to imagine this team not ending the year with 13 or 14 wins at this point. The next 3 games, I think they will be favored. Then they go on the road at Green Bay and Chicago. Tough to peg exactly what those teams will look like and what they'll be playing for at that time. But Minnesota survives again, another 1-possession win. Unbelievable the way they keep pulling it off. And if you've come to a Vikings game this year, you have been through the ringer. The absolute ringer. Let's, in closing, let's just review what happened on the final 2 Jets drives. Jets inherit the ball with 5.5 minutes to go, and all the momentum. They're coming off a touchdown that was reviewed and given to them. They're down by 5. They've got the momentum. They start at their own 16. Takes them 4 plays to get in Vikings territory. A 4th and 10. Mike White threads the needle. I don't know how he got it in to Corey Davis for 31 yards down to the Vikings 16. They worked their way, 1st and goal at the 4. And then from the 1-yard line, it was a struggle. It was a struggle for the Jets. Failure, and then on 4th and goal, a sneak. Mike White shoved back. They should have had him behind the line of scrimmage, and then it just became a standoff at the goal line. White sneaks across. I think the review was correct. I think that should have been a touchdown. But it was very close, and the Jets almost folded right there. And I'm mixing up my drives. That was the Jets' touchdown drive. The drive then following 1st and goal at the 4, run down to the 1, stopped at the 1, and then they pass twice in a row. That's the interesting decision. You pass on 3rd and 1 at the 1, you pass on 4th and 1 at the 1, and I think that's the play calling you question. When you've already converted a successful sneak, do you just run it 2 more times? Try to get in the end zone that way with the Vikings struggling to tackle the way they were? That'll be second guessed. Robert Saleh will have to answer for that. And then lo and behold, the Jets get the ball back again. Very short field. Oodles of time, really. I know they didn't have timeouts, but 78 seconds from the Vikings 43. And they stall at the 19-yard line, nearly picked by Harrison Smith and was picked by Cameron Bynum on the 4th down. But the Vikings fans had to sweat in this one. 27-22, the final score. Thanks for tuning into this one. Luke Braun out for this episode. We hope to have him back next week. In fact, I'm sure we will. You can hear his reaction to this, though, on his Locked on Vikings podcast. Hopefully he's feeling well enough to get that done. And you can hear our Locked on Sports Minnesota reaction, a full slate on Monday. Myself, along with Ron Johnson. It's Luke Inman and Reggie Wilson with Superior Sports Talk. And then Arif Hassan, hopefully Luke Braun, Luke Inman, myself on the Minnesota Football Party. So check that all out. Subscribe to Locked on Sports Minnesota. Thanks for tuning in to this solo production from the U.S. Bank Stadium press box. We'll talk to you next week after the Vikings face the Lions.